Díomh chairde agus fáilte ar ais go dtí an Mhór padcréile. Tá an seachtain seo tá Jake Fitzsimons againn. Bhíos córá Anna Simúil agus Anna Léargas, buin sultas a chairde. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Mhór podcast. This week we had Jake Fitzsimons on. It was a very insightful and interesting conversation. Enjoy, friends. Right, welcome back to episode 9 of the Mhór podcast. I'm absolutely delighted this week to be joined by Jake Fitzsimons. Jake is a history and politics student in Dundalk Institute of Technology University. He's a political activist, nationalist. I've got to know Jake a bit over the last few months. He's a really down-to-earth, sound-out fella, and I'm looking forward to have a proper conversation with him here. Pick his brains a little bit and just, hopefully we can, you, the viewer, and the two of us can get something out of it. So Jake, I'd just like to introduce you to the viewers first. Thank you so much for coming on, and how are we keeping?
It's so great to have your time. I've been well acquainted with you now for a good while, so it's great to finally be speaking to you as close as you can get to face at this stage. It's amazing. Thanks everyone so much who tunes in. It's great to have your time and attention as well. I'm doing very well. How are you?
Sinead, well said. So yeah, look, I'm keeping well, can't complain. Just been about 2 weeks since the podcast with Rab now, which has done a lot better than I thought. Not that I thought I knew Rab would attract a crowd, but it's done better basically than most of my stuff has. So I was very happy with that. Thank you all who tuned into that. Hopefully we got some of those new subscribers over here to hear Jake's perspective now. Jake, we'll get straight into it there. I just wanted to ask, what kind of got you into politics? Was it always something you were interested in from an early age? Has it been something you picked up as you got older? What got you interested in politics?
So to an extent, I have always just been very fascinated with politics, and I could go on and on and on about why. Everything from the psychological aspect, the dynamics of human interaction, the dynamics of social function and structure has just always fascinated me. I've always been very interested in history as well, which is always tied very well into politics. I remember when I was a young boy, like in primary school even, some of the other lads in my class, they'd all be watching cartoons or sitcoms or whatever at home, and I'd be watching RTE News or Octus TV, World War II documentaries, stuff like that. In terms of actually deciding that I wanted to get actively involved, like run for office, that was something that kind of organically happened over the last 1.5 to 2 years. So how I got started directly getting involved in the political affairs of my community is, so before I started studying at DKIT, I was studying journalism and psychology in DIFI, the Drogheda Institute of Further Education. And for my work experience in that course, I did a few weeks in a place called Duleek District News. So that's where I live in Duleek, which is a village about 10 kilometres or so from Drogheda. And Duleek District News is a news outlet run by multiple politicians. So it's run by Senator Sharon Keoghan, Councillor Geraldine Keoghan of the Laytown Bettystown district, and Councillor Amanda Smith of the Ashbourne district in Meath. And so I worked in there just doing basic things like working on the social medias, going through the newspapers and finding local stories and local events and initiatives that I thought would be relevant to my community. And so I worked in there for a few weeks' time. And it was just really good timing and fortunate luck on my end, because the local elections, it was an election year, right? So I did my work experience in there and they liked me enough. And Sharon would also be kind of friendly enough with my mother. And so that's part of how I got that gig as well. And then they liked me well enough then that they brought me in for canvassing for the local elections. So it was Geraldine and Amanda's re-election campaigns. So I did that. And then those were a success. We won both of those. And so they decided to bring me on then for the more ambitious general election campaign. And this was for Gillian Toole, who at the time was a councillor based out of Ratoath and a Gaeilge and a pharmacist as well. and she was running for TD. This was her first time going. And so the way the Meath independents work is they're a bit different from other independents in the sense that they kind of form an unofficial political party. You know, they canvass for each other, they promote each other, they tell each other's voter bases to give each other number 2 and number 3 votes, stuff like that. So myself, Sharon and Geraldine were all out canvassing for Gillian during the general election then. And thankfully, she got in that last seat, which was just added into Meath East during the most recent elections. So we got her elected, and now she's one of the government TDs for anyone who's been keeping track of her, and she's been doing a great job. Delighted with her for that. And then I just did bits and bobs with Sharon then afterwards. I was in Leinster House earlier this year, doing stuff related to the Shannon re-election campaign then that was going on. And then that was a success. And then that's when I really decided, it was earlier this year that I decided I was going to run myself. And so since then, I've been keeping my head down, really just trying to get stuck into as many different things in my local community as possible, get my name and face out there. I'm a member of the working group in Kells and Ashburn, and occasionally Navan and Trim as well with Meath Women's Refuge. I'm a member of Meath Civil Defence, which has a unit based in Duleek, which I volunteer for a lot. And I plan to just do more in the next few years. It ties into military as well. I always decided that I wanted to dabble in military employment to some extent when I was younger. And when you're little, you think that every military is just like Call of Duty. You know, you look at American media and you think that's what all militaries are like. But as I got older and matured more and realized kind of how pathetic our military, both in terms of infrastructure and structure of affairs was, that's another thing that I wanted to get into politics for as well, was to, you know, if you even have a skim of my profiles, you'll get a gist quite quickly that a lot of my policy is very pro-military and military-based. So I wanted to try and actively make a difference to improve the military infrastructure of our country as well, which is something I view as very important.
Fantastic. You know, I think like we all are, us like political nerds who are interested in politics, we all have a big interest in these big international issues, these big even national issues that are going on, the big social war debates. But ultimately, I think what the purpose of politics is ultimately to help people. So the fact that you're in it to be, you know, getting active in your local community, you're joining these various civil unions, councils, things like this, I think it's fantastic. And I think it's, you know, that's kind of where, you know, in terms of people talk a lot about common sense, that's kind of where we need to go back to with politics, is bring it back to just, you know, local issues and making sure people just are able to get by before we debate what is a woman or whatever, you know, which I'm sure we'll get to as well. I just want to ask next, Jake, what's kind of your future plans and aspirations when it comes to politics? You know, do you plan to maybe run with a party or as an independent? You know, yeah, what's your kind of aspirations? I know you've touched on it there, but if you don't mind, would you maybe expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah. So first of all, I feel like I've got a pretty solid foundation. One of the most happiest moments of recent years in my life was over the summer. I was very happy to get appointed to my local town committee. So I was nominated to be appointed onto that by a couple of county councillors. It's made up of 16 individuals, 4 county councillors and 16 different individual. Sorry, the other 12 are, you know, you'd have, say, like the local pharmacy guy representing business, the local Gaelic coach representing sport, and then I'd be on it representing Duleek Revival, which is Sharon Cogan's organisation about things to do with the direct Duleek community. And I'd also be representing young people and students on that as well. And I'm also the co-treasurer for that. So that's been my most significant piece of progress so far. In terms of my future plans, so I am an independent at the moment. Yes, all the politicians I've worked for have been independents. I like to keep my options open. I'm quite friendly and quite well acquainted with many different groups in the nationalist community. I've got connections everywhere. I attend different events run by different parties, and I'd be quite well affiliated with some of the higher up members in said parties. So we'll see what happens. Right now, I am independent, but as I've said to people, the next elections are still a few years away. I'm still quite young. I'm not looking to commit myself one way or the other too soon. So I'm open-minded. That could change, and I am, I won't say too much, but I am in some degree of communication and early negotiations with a couple of different groups, and we are having those conversations, and we'll see what comes out of those. But right now I'm keeping my options open, and right now I am independent, yes.
Fantastic. Look, I suppose it's good your voters know that potential voters in the future, because you have confirmed you'll be running in the next election.
I'll be running I'll be running as an independent candidate in the next local elections in Meath. Which district is still to be decided. It will either be Laytown, Bettystown, or Ashbourne. I'll just have to get a bit closer to the elections, and then I'll decide. I might even run in both, which I think you can do. I think Sharon Keoghan ran in both of those districts and was elected in both of them a few years ago. So I may even run in both.
Unreal, why not go for the juggler? Absolutely. So look, now people know a bit about your background, a bit about what you stand for and what your aspirations are. We better get into kind of one of the more meaty topics that tends to divide people, but I think it's important we ask these questions. So what would you yourself say to claim that Ireland is full?
Yeah, so this is something that I have talked about a lot, and it's something that I really find interesting to talk about, because I think a lot of retrospective history and revisionism comes into it. So I think that the main crux of the issue, the main source of kind of confusion and disagreement when it comes to this particular debate, is the definition of what full actually means. So there are two different interpretations you can take, and this is what causes a lot of the debate issues. So you have literally full in terms of like an actual physical space sense, and then you have full in terms of operational logistics ability and sustainability. So in terms of physical space, Ireland is factually not full, and it's not even anywhere near, quite frankly. You look at the Netherlands, which is about half of Ireland's physical size, and it has a population of 3 to 4 times. And if you go visit the Netherlands, it's not a particularly population dense place. You don't feel penned in like you would in some cities like Asia, for example. So you look at the Netherlands, which has a huge population, significantly bigger than ours, despite being half the size. And also you need to take into account, if it wasn't for the famine, we would most likely have a population of at least 15 to 20 million. And some historians project it could be as high as potentially even 30 million. Okay, so, and in some ways, we do actually have the capacity to support a significantly larger population. So if you look at, say, meat and dairy production, we're one of the most self-sufficient countries in the world when it comes to those particular products. We have enough food to feed a population around that size too. We export a lot. But is Ireland full in the sense of the ability to currently accommodate a population larger than about the size it has now without reducing quality of life substantially per capita? And the answer to that is yes, absolutely, Ireland is full. Okay, there are multiple different infrastructures and multiple different sectors that we need to look at when we're talking about how much a population can be maintained. And the main three of issue of examination in Ireland are education, housing, and what was the other? Education, housing, and healthcare, right? So those are the three. So those three sectors are all very much drained, okay? And those are the three sectors that really are the most crucial in determining how big of a population can be sustained in a country. A really good analogy, at least I think it's a really good analogy that I just thought of, is if you want to imagine Ireland as a country kind of like a stadium, right? Or an arena. So imagine it's like a football stadium. We're full, but not in the sense that every seat is filled. We're full in the sense that there are too many people at the entrance and it's crammed and we can't get any more through the door, right? So it really depends, and this is where clarification really comes into debate in terms of its importance. We could theoretically sustain a much larger population one day. But as it stands right now, the country's infrastructure, even with European subsidies, even with whatever financial tricks and plays that the current government wants to try, it's just not able to handle a larger population. We're about at capacity now in terms of how much we can facilitate while still maintaining the high quality of life per capita that Ireland has been renowned for the past few years. I do think we need to put a pause on at the moment.
I think that's a really good answer, genuinely. The famine argument is often made that, yeah, as you mentioned, many historians project that it would have been, 30 million, up to 30 million at a probably maximum 15 million at a minimum. I suppose to me that is a decent argument, but it takes context out of it, because that is 15 to 30 million with respect to everyone coming in here. I suppose Irish born people. So that means that they were born from like Irish parents, and therefore, as a parent, your duty to your child is to protect them and to nourish them, cherish them, etc. Whereas when the huge numbers that we're seeing coming from other countries, these are people who we don't know and people who, we don't have an obligation to, I suppose, look after naturally. Now, so it is kind of a contextless argument. Now, I just want to caveat that with saying I think it's absolutely crucial that everybody, and I'm saying this as a Catholic, but even if you have no faith, I think everyone should kind of think this. It's absolutely crucial that everybody is treated with dignity, respect, utmost respect, all that kind of stuff. But I don't actually think it does anyone any favors to come into the current climate Ireland is in, because, as you say, we're just having awful trouble accommodating people. So look, I think that's a really solid answer. People are obviously open to the interpretation, can leave their views in the comments, but yeah, I think that's I think that's a fantastic answer. Honestly, it's you kind of broke it down from multiple angles. Just to stay on the sort of immigration topic, would you say there should be a distinction between like genuine immigration concerns, which I think many people are sharing, and I suppose out and out racism that is maybe intimidating to other people and is, I don't have, racism basically. It's as simple as that. Do you think there should be, I suppose, a distinction between those two things?
Absolutely. So this is a really interesting one to unpack. So where do I want to start? The first place I want to start is, I think that, first of all, I don't think I'll get any argument from anyone watching here that terms like racist, xenophobic, far right, all of those things are way overplayed and overused nowadays. They're just thrown around at everyone. And I think that it's the people that do that actually help contribute towards placating actual racists in the country. Because if everybody's called racist, it makes it easier for actual racists to go under the radar and have plausible deniability. So that's the first thing I'll say. Diluting the term takes power away from it, because there are some genuine racists in Ireland, and I would say there are even some genuine racists in the more radical spheres of the nationalist community. The number is significantly exaggerated, but it is certainly very real. The main argument I hear people give for calling individuals such as myself and in my community racist is the kind of demonstrable in terms of rhetoric preference for immigrants of certain ethnicities and certain races, right? But what they're ignoring or being ignorant to is the fact that this is correlation, not causation. So I believe, this is my policy, which I've laid out quite clearly online plenty of times, but just to reiterate, my policy on immigration is that ideally the majority, not all, but the majority of immigrants to any country should be from countries that have cultures that are compatible and congruent with the dominant culture of the party of the country receiving them. I don't think any sane person or anyone seriously interested in real conversation would argue with the statement that a Canadian moving from Toronto to Ireland is going to have an easier time settling in and integrating than a Ukrainian or Polish, and them even more so than a Ukrainian, a Syrian or Nigerian or Vietnamese. Like, that's just a fact. Okay, people from similar countries, they make more ideal immigrants because they are more likely to speak the same language. They're more likely to have the same cultural values. They're more likely to branch out more and socialize with more people outside of their own group. But ethnicity is tied to culture, right? Like, that's just a fact. So if I was to say, I think the majority of our immigration should comprise of, say, Irish diaspora or people from Anglosphere countries, such as, say, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, what have you. In practice, yes, those immigrants are going to end up being predominantly white because that is the typical race of Anglosphere natives and Irish diaspora. But that's absolutely not the main priority or the primary motivator in this. But like, I know firsthand from dealing with members in my kind of trying to attach themselves to my movement, I've made it very clear that nationalism is about loving your own country and your own people. It's not about hating others. When I go to a nationalist demonstration, I want to have an atmosphere of pride and passion, not bitterness and resentment. Now a bit of anger and a bit of fieriness is good because it creates a lively crowd and it gets people motivated. But you have to be very, very careful with how that's directed. I have said multiple times that there is a difference between being an Irish nationalist and being a white nationalist who's Irish. There are some select individuals, and I know multiple. My college has quite a diverse population. I have multiple friends and acquaintances who come from African or Asian backgrounds, and they speak with full Irish accents. They play Irish sports. They even speak a bit of Irish. They've got tricolours in their homes. They even say they would fight for the 6 counties. I've got a couple even trying to join the army. I'm joining the reserve soon, and I was in Aiken Barracks, and there was one fella there named Mohammed who he spoke with a full Irish accent, and he was there to join the army, and he was very passionate about Irish nationalism. I've got no issue at all giving these select individuals within reason passports and recognizing them as Irish citizens and Irish nationals, of course. But at the same time, Irish is also a real ethnicity. I think that's the distinction that's important to make, is the difference between citizenship and nationality and ethnicity, because Irish is a real ethnicity. It's that's a documented, well understood and well agreed fact. And so to just completely delude the social intelligence of all those around you by trying to say that someone whose parents, grandparents, and all ancestral lineage, quite frankly, is from Africa or Asia, is ethnically Irish or tantamount to being ethnically Irish, I think not only is that undermining to sovereignty and the Irish nation as a whole, but it's also, I would say, undermining to the validity of that respective migrants' own heritage and own culture where they come from. But I've tried, and so far I have been successful with distancing myself from genuine racists and genuine racial agitators in my community. I've gotten some pushback and some, I suppose, controversy from some of my own followers and some of my own associates in the space for doing so, because they try and play the card of, oh, well, listen, we're all nationalists at the end of the day, so we have to put our differences aside and come together. And that's something that I really feel like has been manipulated, because I absolutely do agree that the biggest thing that's holding the Irish kind of alternative or anti-establishment nationalist scene back the most is lack of communication and organisation and coordination with all the various different splinter groups. I absolutely do believe that we need to put differences aside and come together on common goals, similar to the way that the left have recently formed a quite professional coalition around Catherine Connolly. That's something we could take out of their playbook. But that's supposed to apply to just kind of minor personal grievances and minor policy differences, right? That's what it's supposed to mean. When people say we should accommodate others in the community and work together despite personal differences, that's what that's supposed to mean. But some select individuals are kind of using it as a card to just excuse association with clearly nefarious actors and clearly bad faith actors who actually have no interest really in contributing to and legitimizing the nationalist cause in Ireland. They're really just there to spread hate. And in my opinion, and I've been doing so myself, we need to distance ourselves from people like that as much as possible. And people don't believe me when I say this, but I really do mean it when I say, like, I don't want anything to do with those people more than the left do. Like, if it were up to me, they wouldn't be welcome at any of our rallies either.
Well said, man. Well said. Very passionate.
And I'll say too, sorry, I'll just say it very quickly as well. Like, there's absolutely, and this may get me some pushback as well from some of my more staunch supporters, but fair enough. I'm not here to, I'm just here to tell the truth. I'm not here to keep or make friends. There's absolutely a place for Black Irish in the nationalist movement to an extent that is not being acknowledged and is being outright refuted by some of the more stubborn members in our group. You've got one gentleman I can think of who I was actually in recent communication with, and I admire greatly, is a man by the name of Tyon Mercer. I don't know if you'd know him. Yeah, people like him who say so many. He says so many of the things that we agree on. I'd be very hard pressed to think of a quote that I've heard from Tyon Mercer that I would outright refute. Most of everything I've heard from him and some of his followers, like, I completely agree on. They share much of the same rhetoric, much of the same policy, much of the same social stances. But I've heard reports from close sources that despite trying to reach out and despite trying to co-align themselves, many people from the Black Irish community, who, keep in mind, are third, maybe fourth generation, like, they're well assimilated, they're being blatantly discriminated against, and they're being disallowed from attending nationalist rallies, right? And what I have particular umbrage with is you'll hear many of the faces of these movements. They'll say time and time again, just because we love our country doesn't mean we're racist. We don't have anything against races. It's not about race. It's not about skin color or anything like that. But then supposedly, according to reports, they're outright banning Black Irish or Black Irish speakers from showing up to support our rallies against immigration. Like, to me, that shows just a complete lack of nuance and a lack of prioritization in the brain. Okay, I personally, if I'm going to be completely bluntly honest and real with these people, the idea of a 100% pure ethno state in the West died the moment that the airplane was invented. Okay, so you're going to have to stop letting perfection be the enemy of progress. Okay, you can have your umbrage or your gripes with the existence of Black Irish, quite frankly, which I don't have an issue with. Obviously, as I've said before, and I will stand by this, I think the majority of our immigrants should be coming from the Anglosphere and Irish diaspora, which is a huge pool of. But I don't object to the existence of Black Irish as a concept, of there being Black Irish individuals. But what I will say is, even if you do take offense to such individuals existing, you need to have prioritization. I don't see how any person could make the rational argument that Black Irish who are completely assimilated, like, not only were they born here, but their parents were born here, like, they're completely culturally assimilated beyond any doubt. I don't see how those people are supposed to be put on the same tier of priority or threat as first generation unvetted radical Islamists coming into the border. So, like, you have to stop letting perfection be the enemy of progress, and you have to be willing to just kind of say, to a certain extent, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, even if you do view them that way, which I wouldn't even, but even if you do, just have that kind of mentality and have the sense to be able to prioritize your issues. I think that's something that, but based on conversations I've had with some in the community, there are others that share that sentiment with me, and we're trying to progress that kind of sub-agenda to an extent and get that link made and strengthened a bit. But it's going to take time for some of the other members in the movement to wake up and realize that.
but look, Toyam is a really top guy. Yeah, I am in contact with him from time to time as well. Just, you know, he has something to offer to the nation, and I think that can't be ignored. You know, people are totally right to have immigration concerns. I have them as well. I think the current system is absolutely shambolic, but
Yeah,
you
I
know,
agree.
I think I don't see how. I think it's quite immature, to be honest, to look at someone and say, no, you can't be a part of this just because their skin color, and it's just ignoring their characteristics, what they have to offer, and so on and so forth. You know, so I think that's extremely well said. I don't want to like as you know, I'd be an AN2 member, which has admittedly probably distanced themselves from the nationalist movement. So I don't want to speak in against something that I'm not really a part of. So it's not really my place to say whether
I
they're
understand
right
that.
or wrong. Sorry.
I understand that. That's fine.
Exactly. Yeah. But but my perspective is that it's. I think there is I know many people in my life who are of non-Irish ethnicity, not ethnically Irish, but do have a lot to offer to the Irish nation. And I think we should be focusing on building bridges with them rather than breaking them down, I suppose. So look, we might. Do you have anything else you'd like to say on the immigration topic before we move on? Or
I'll just say quickly, like, people need to pick a stance and then stick to it, because the inconsistency that I've observed with many members of the community is frustrating. You've got this rhetoric that they'll keep resorting to again and again, which is that it's about assimilation and it's about cultural compatibility. But then when you have immigrants who are maybe even first generation, but they completely embrace elements of Irish culture, they actively attempt to learn Irish, they play Irish sports, they do Irish dancing, they wave tricolours, whatever. Like, they're proud to have chosen Ireland as their home, which in my opinion actually is a special type of dynamic that's unique. And I think that's one of the admirable things about immigration, is that you have that unique dynamic of choosing a nation as the nation that, like, that's what I want to belong to and that's what I want to contribute to, which people born here don't have. Now, in my opinion, that's no slight or way to say that immigration is preferable compared to native born. Absolutely not. But it's an interesting dynamic that needs to be tapped into. But then you have these people that say it's about cultural integration and assimilation rather than race. But then when you have some immigrants who actually do attempt to assimilate and integrate, they're rejected anyway. And they said, doesn't matter, you'll still never be Irish, which of course, in a sense is absolutely true in terms of basic fundamental principles. But I'm just wondering if these people are going to realize that they're actually kind of contributing to their own problem there. Because if you're going to be rejecting people who are trying to assimilate anyway, regardless, then they're just going to say, right, what's the point? And that's actually going to discourage them even more so from going outside of the circle. And it's going to encourage them even more so to stay within their own social groups, which is going to perpetuate the idea of generational compounding non-integration.
very well said. Very well said. Because what's the alternative? You know, the government are trying to bring deportations in, and that's costing the taxpayer. So I'm not accusing anybody of actually wanting this, but what do you actually do? Do you put them in? Do you kill them all? Do you And I don't think that's what any of us rational-minded people want to do. So it's like, I think it's definitely the preferable option for the Irish people is that the new Irish are assimilated into our way of living, our cultural tradition, and so on and so forth. I think that's actually more beneficial to us than against us, kind of thing. Really great chat, Jake, on the immigration. So thanks, really. Look, we had to discuss it. So fair play to you. I just want to move on to, look, you're a student I think I touched it earlier, in Dundalk, studying history and politics.
Yeah.
What's kind of your experience of university life and as a young student?
It's all right. I really, really love my college so much. I chose to go to DKIT. I had grades to go to other ones, but along with the proximity, I also decided to go to DKRT because I preferred the idea of a smaller college, because I just like having a more personal relationship with your teachers. It's easier to have one-on-one discussions. It's easier to get to know your classmates. And I just liked it a lot. I love DKIT, and I think it's a great college to go to, and I'd recommend it for anyone living close enough. My experience there, so it hasn't really been a thing this year. People have kind of laid off me this year for whatever reason. Now that might change again once we move on to more spicier topics, which I know we're going to in the modules in the second semester. But first year now, I did get quite a bit of flack. I was dealing with getting reported and having to go to meetings and getting complaints made against me for really just saying very basic facts. So, for example, I had to go into a meeting because I was reported by a female classmate for misogyny, because I said that if you have a man and a woman who are around the same height and the same weight, the vast majority of the time the man will be physically stronger, and so therefore certain labor jobs are more suited for different sexes, and that got me reported. I regularly find myself debating 3, 4, 5 people, sometimes including the teacher, at once at the same time. And the thing is, I'm obviously, yeah, my opinions would go against the grain, but they're not as unpopular as many would be led to believe. I've had multiple instances of people in my class coming up to me one-on-one when no one else was around and saying, Jake, I actually agree with a lot of the stuff you say, but when we're in class, I kind of pretend that I don't, because I see the kind of flack you get and I don't want to be falling out with people. So I'm not the only person who holds a lot of the views that I have, but I'm the only one who's brash enough to actually say it publicly. And part of that is just my type of personality. I'm just quite one of my core values is self-authenticity. And if you don't like me, you don't like me. If you do, you do. And I'm just that type of guy. I'm not necessarily there to make any friends. But another element of it is the fact that I'm running for office. And something that I say to my classmates, because I've got mates who would be hanging out, and they say to me, Jake, do you really always have to give your honest opinion? Like, why do you always have to be getting into arguments with the teacher or whoever in class? Can you not just nod along and say whatever? And I say, man, what kind of example does that set, or what kind of precedence does that set for me as an aspiring elected representative? And I'm already an appointed representative. But if I wanted to take that next step, how am I supposed to be able to say that I can be trusted to sufficiently and adequately represent others, the thoughts and the desires and the problems of others, if I don't even have the courage and integrity to represent myself? So, quite frankly, I don't care whether I'm going in there and it's the only person, and I'm the only person saying what I'm saying. I'll always give my honest opinion, and it can be tough, not to pat myself in the back too heavy, but not everyone could do it. It's hard to go in, especially at first. It's because it was a particularly interesting time, because we were starting first semester, first year, just when the United States election was going on for the president. So it was a very interesting contemporary scene that was unique to that specific few month time period. But it's hard. It's hard going into a class. Like, picture yourself like in that kind of position. It's hard to go into a room with a couple dozen people, knowing that no one else is going to be taking your side, and it's going to be you against the entire room whenever you give an opinion. That's hard. And you get people that they'd act kind of smug to you, kind of on their own high horse, but they couldn't do what I do. Like, it's easy to speak your mind and share your opinion when everybody else is going to agree with you. It's not a very nice feeling whatsoever when you say your opinion and everybody else in the room is against you. Or arguably even worse, not everyone else is against you, but the people who are with you still won't even take your side because they're too intimidated to. That's arguably even worse. So it's hard. So not everyone could do that, but I do it. And I do it quite regularly, and I do it quite easily, because that's just how I represent myself, and it's what I'm about. Regarding outside of the actual classroom, I'm also quite involved in student union affairs. So I ran for student union president last year, and I'll tell you a bit about that. First of all, I didn't actually expect to win. I was a first year going against the current vice president, who's been there for 5 years, and we only had essentially 3 days of campaigning to do. So essentially he had 5 years to build up a voter base. I had 3 days. No one knew who I was. So all things considering, I actually did quite well. It was just me and him for the position. So I did lose, yes, which I expected to. But the goal wasn't to win this last year. It was just to get my name and face out there and build up a voter base for the next couple ones. So I'm running again this year because I performed quite well last year, all things considering. I also had zero campaign team whatsoever. He had the rest of the executive, including the current president, and other vice president campaigning for him. I had literally no one, literally just me sitting at a stand in the hallway waiting for people to come up and having conversations. So all things considered, I did quite well for myself. And so I'm running again this year. I'm hoping to get the communications part-time officer position this month. That's when the elections are for the part-time officers. And then for the main executive, the elections will be in March. But yeah, I had people, this was reported to me by eyewitnesses. So this is information I've gotten from people who supposedly seen it, but there were people going around taking down my election posters, completely legitimately placed. There are people going around taking down my election posters. And also, I had an incident at the Students' Union presidential debate, or the hustings, where one man caused a bit of a scene near the end. He's in my class, actually. He's a student of mine. He's quite a hardcore communist. And he actually stood up during the debate and essentially accused me of being a neo-Nazi in front of the whole crowd. He said he called me a National Socialist in front of the whole crowd at the debate, in front of the, it was being live streamed as well to the rest of the college. So now, luckily, nobody took much heed of him, and it didn't affect the output at all. Nobody seemed to care. But it was the principle of it. I thought that was very bad form. And the ironic part is, and I won't get too much into that, but that man actually, over the summer, actually kind of woke up a little bit and kind of changed a lot of his opinions now. And he's actually, me and him are actually fairly decent pals now. Yeah, he kind of got a bit basified over the summer, as I say. I don't know what happened to him, but he's more chill now. But that was drama I had last year. I also got removed from my WhatsApp group. So last year, I gave the position away to another fella this year. But last year, I was one of the class reps for my class. And the other class rep, she blocked me from the class WhatsApp group. And you know why she did that? It was because I was canvassing for Gillian Toole, and on election day, I said that I wasn't going to give Sinn Féin my number one vote, that I was going for independence. And so I got blocked from the WhatsApp group for that. And all of that in and of itself is quite outrageous in my opinion. But it's especially ludicrous because those same people would probably whisper behind my back and call me a fascist or call me authoritarian or whatever buzzwords they like to use. But I've never done any of those things to anyone else. I've never tried to censor anyone in my class for a different opinion. I've never personally attacked anyone for a different opinion. I've never sent nasty messages online or tried to interfere with democratic processes for someone just because I disagreed with their opinion. I've never done any of those things to anyone in my class, but I've had all of those things done to me multiple times. So it really is just the hypocrisy and the kind of gaslighting aspect of it that I think is quite bad. But as I said, that was mainly first year. No such incidents now this year. Everyone seems to have calmed down a bit. I think a bit of it is just the Overton window and just kind of not giving them an inch. So I just kind of wouldn't let up. And I think that's how you avoid cancel culture, is if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. So what I did is, no matter how many times I got reported or complained about or whatever, I just didn't shut up and I just didn't stop. And so eventually then people just stopped reporting me because they just learned to just shrug their shoulders and say, well, that's just par for Jake. That's just the way Jake is. So if you're just persistent like that, you can almost kind of nearly get away with more things, because if you show that kind of weakness at all whatsoever, the mob know then that you'll obey them or you'll succumb to them if they make enough noise. So that would be my number one piece of advice for anyone wanting to avoid being cancelled like that, is just double down nearly. Just double down, because eventually people will just get kind of so used to hearing such things for you that it'll kind of dilute each individual thing you say, and it won't cause as much long-lasting outrage. But overall, I have a very pleasant experience at college. I've met some great friends, and I love my experience, and I genuinely love going in every single day. I've got great teachers. Classes are great. Really enjoy the subject material. It's very relevant to my future career.
Wow, that's some incredible stories. Do you know, I didn't realize how but it just shows anybody with any slightly right-leaning conservative beliefs how they're just absolutely demonized and ostracized in modern universities.
Yeah,
you know, it's absolutely shocking. But I think that the courage that you have to just persist and just keep on I don't want to blow too much smoke up your hole here, but it's really admirable that you just keep on and you're authentic, as you said, and you just keep it. I think that's really that resilience will definitely bring you a long way. Like, and I suppose our classes at UCC, there could be tutorials, but they actually don't do tutorials of politics. Maybe that's why, which are smaller classes. Maybe they want to avoid the confrontation. But there is, our lectures are huge. Like, you don't really get much of a chance to debate people or to even ask questions because it's such a big range of people. Well, you can ask the odd question at the end of the lecture, but that's kind of about it. So it's yeah, I think, like, but I know myself, if anyone any bit right leaning was to challenge the student union or anything like that, they'd be absolutely demonized. So it's quite sad, but it's good that we do have people like yourself in the unis, because that's how it's through discourse, it's through talking to people, that's how you're going to win hearts and minds. So fair play to you. Sorry, did you want to come in there, or?
So I'll just say a couple of things. I also have a friend of mine, a girl who I just got acquainted with a few weeks ago, actually, because she saw my content online and she reached out to me because she was feeling quite isolated. So she's a woman from Wicklow, and she went with me to the National Party Conference in Blanchardstown a few weeks ago. She's in Wicklow, but she attends Carlow, I think St. Pat's in Carlow, that college, and she is kind of similar to myself. She's constantly getting kind of abuse in the classroom for going against the grain. She'd have more right-wing or conservative views compared to the standard as well. And she had an interesting story. So she was actually made the Irish officer of the Students' Union. Now, DKT doesn't have one of those. Outside of the main three, it's discretionary. But she was made the Irish officer of Carlow St. Pat's College. And she did fine in that job for however long, a few months, a year, whatever. And then she was removed from the role, right? Not elected out. She was just removed from the role. She was impeached or whatever from it because people heard about some of her opinions and just didn't want someone like that in power. And here's the best part. She didn't get replaced. There was no one lined up to replace her. So that was a year or so ago now. And to this day, right now, currently, St. Pat's College does not have an Irish officer. It's supposed to have one on paper, but the student union just straight up does not have any Irish officer. So they literally rathered not have anyone in that position than have her in it, and she was doing just a fine job just because of her political beliefs. It's completely cutting off your nose to spite your face, and it's awful. And I remember I was working on the USI Constitutional Assembly last year, and I drafted a piece of legislation. It was shortly after the October walkout that happened around this time last year for the rent prices and student accommodation, and I thought that was it went terrible. And so I'm not going to go into legislative details. I'm not going to bore you with that. But long story short is I wrote a piece of legislation to standardize protests in the future all across USI. And I gave it to the student union president, who was supposed to bring it to the annual USI Congress and read it for possible implementation, which only the college president can do. And she said to me, yeah, this looks great. It makes a lot of sense. I could see it passing. I'll run it by the Midlands, Borderlands, and West regional vice president for input, and then we'll send it off, and then we'll let you know by around this time tomorrow if there are any issues with it, right? So if somebody says that to you, right, that's pretty much verbatim what she said. If someone says that to you, I feel like it's pretty reasonable then to assume that 24 hours later, after I hadn't heard any word, I feel like it's pretty logical and reasonable to assume that the legislation had been passed and there was no objections. But then it was actually revealed to me that it was not approved and it was not sent for submission, right? Not that it didn't get passed by the Congress. It wasn't even submitted for review. And do you know when I found this out? I was only told this after I brought it up as a kind of bragging point to boost my CV a bit at the actual presidential debate, right? On live stream in front of the whole college, when people were asking me my qualifications, what I've done in past roles, I mentioned that. I said that was quite a good piece of legislation. And to be fair to myself, I'm the one who came up with that and brought that to the president. And then I see her shaking her head off camera, and I'm like, what's going on? She goes, we didn't send it off. That's when they decided to tell me. And I sent her an email afterwards saying, what's the deal? First of all, why did you not tell me it was sent when you told me you'd tell me if there were any issues? I was pretty reasonable to assume it had been passed because you told me that you'd say to me if it wasn't going to be. So first of all, why wasn't it passed? Second of all, why didn't you tell me? No response, completely ghosted. And she's out with the college now. She didn't run for re-election. She just left now. So that bill is in limbo, but I've still got the draft of it with me in my files. So if I become president, I'm just going to cut through all of that bureaucracy nonsense and I'm just going to submit it myself. But I still have no idea what the objection was with the bill, why it didn't get passed. And quite frankly, it felt conspiratorial because the fact that she was friends with the other candidate. And you know what I mean? It felt like they were kind of almost trying to sabotage me a bit. But I was able to kind of twist it around on them on the spot. I was quick on my feet and I kind of said it in a way that made them look bad then. It's like, oh, this is the kind of organization that we're dealing with. So I was able to kind of spin it back on them. But that felt to me just like so shady.
Look, it's incredible what's going on in the colleges. It's absolutely incredible. Look, while we're on the topic, I might as well share our experience that, you know, a group of us, A&2 members in UCC, a lot with help from other people in OGRA, about, you know, just under a year ago now, tried to set up an OGRA A&2 society on campus. To set up a society, you need 100 signatures to get, you know, before you can even think about it. We got those 100. It wasn't all people who agreed with us. It wasn't like we were going to get 100 members. But our pitch to people was, look, there's parties, there's representation for, you know, every other Dáil Éireann party in Ireland, in UCC. If you believe in democracy and fairness and giving everyone a chance, just sign this. Some students didn't, that's fine, but we did get 100 who did. It was sent off. We're still waiting for a reply as to whether or not we're going to be get our society or not. It kind of feels a bit hopeless at this stage, but it just shows, because as you would know, like, I suppose A&2 would be of the right leaning people, probably the most moderate, I might say. So the fact that, like, they can't even accept A&2, it kind of shows you what you're dealing with, I suppose.
What hope do I have if you can't get through? The only plus side I'll say, I don't mean to interrupt, but the only plus side I'll say, that's really one of the benefits of a smaller college, right? Because you said you needed 100 signatures to start up a society. In DKIT, it's 8. You only need 8 signatures. So that's where I am kind of at a benefit. But man, if A&2 are... Because, like, now, not me, I've got so much respect for A&2. I love A&2. I've been to A&2 demonstrations before, like for rallies held by Paddy Toyban and different councillors, and I've shaken his hand, took a photo with them. I've so much respect for A&2, and I'd attend A&2 demonstrations whenever the next one is. I've so much respect for A&2, but I've got friends and associates who would call A&2 woke. So if A&2, like, I'm not a member of the National Party, but I'm quite a close affiliate. I'm an independent associate, and I've been trying to help them kind of in their effort to get a bit closer to the campuses, and I'm trying to do my part. But man, if A&2 are having trouble getting legitimised by the colleges, it's going to be rough for us. But that is something that we do benefit a lot from having the smaller colleges. The fact that we only need 8 signatures to get them started. But that's one of the reasons. It's not the only reason, but that's one of the reasons that I'm going for student union president. Because I apparently kind of knows that that's the only way this is going to get done. Like, if I become student union president, I'd have the authority to just welcome any group in. And I would welcome any group in. Now, obviously, the main one that I'd be affiliated with in this context is the National Party, because they're the ones that get the hardest treatment. They're just outright banned from many campuses. And so, but that's the point that I've made, that I think DKIT is it's not the biggest college, but it's a valuable college to have because it's a border college, and it's important to get a lot of that nationalist influence in. So if I was to become student union president, I would have the authority to approve or welcome in anything related to A&2, whether it's National Party, IFP. To be honest, I don't really care. Like, I'm not a big aligned guy one way or the other. As far as I'm concerned, whatever group you belong to, if you're up and coming and you're anti-establishment and you're generally nationalist, you're welcome. But that's one of the main kind of incentives for me to get student union presidency, because it's the only way it's really going to be done. Like, just being in the position and being the man myself to do it directly, it's going to be the easiest pathway to it.
And I think it's important to say as well, if you were a student, and I don't want to like speak for you here, but if you were a student union president of DKIT, you'd be welcoming Social Democrats, PDP, all the left-wing parties, just for the sake of debate and discourse. Like what are UCC student unions so afraid of that A&2 can't get a society, or the National Party, Irish Freedom Party, etc. What is it that they're so afraid of? They're literally living in an echo chamber, and there's just no room for any other debate. Are they afraid that they're going to be proved wrong? What is it? So I think, look, if you do become president, please God, I'll help you out any way I can from all the way down here. Then hopefully DKIT can be the beginning of a shining light that can start proper discourse in universities in this country, and not just the echo chambers we've been living in over the last few years.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting process to pay attention to. Like I said, it may go under the radar for many because it's not University of Galway with the Burkes, it's not Trinity or UCD, but the DKIT student presidential elections next year and this year and in 2027 are going to be really interesting to keep an eye on. I especially like my chances for 2027 because the way the term limits work, you can't hold any of the, so there are three main executive positions. There's a president, and then there's one vice president for engagement and one for welfare and equality. You can only hold any of those positions twice. You can't hold any of those positions more than twice, and you can't hold any combination of any of the three more than three times. So the way the term limits are stacking up, both the current president and the other really popular girl who would have the best chance of becoming president, regardless of anything else that happens, regardless of what happens next year. I don't mean next year as in 2026. I mean next academic year, so 2027. That's the year that both of them are going to be ineligible to run. So 2027 is when I really like my chances. But of course, I'm going to give it a go this year too. We'll see what happens.
Very best of luck in your pursuits. We'll just move on. I think that there's a fascinating discussion about universities, and I hope, as I say, I'll repeat, like DKIT can be sort of a shining light that can restart proper discourse in this country in the university systems. But I just want to move on. How do you feel about the contemporary presidential election that's going on at the moment? Obviously, it's very limited. There's two candidates there that many people are clearly feeling unaligned with, according to the opinion polls. Obviously they have their supporters as well, but yeah, I just like to hear your thoughts on the presidential campaign. What do you make of it overall?
Yeah. So first of all, and maybe we can get more into this later, but one of my more radical hot takes would be that if it were completely up to me, we actually wouldn't even have a president. I think that the office of the presidency should be dissolved and kind of just combined with the Taoiseach, because I just think it's a bit of a wasteful role. I understand some people's appeal towards it, but if it were up to me, we actually wouldn't even have a presidency. But regardless of the process, so this would have been my first year being able to vote in a presidential election, and I'm kind of disappointed that I actually won't be voting. I'll either abstain from voting or there's a good chance I'll spoil my vote as well. I don't think there's any country that has the same presidential election format as us. And I think, look, at the end of the day, it's constitutional and you can respect that. But just because you respect the law does not mean by any stretch of the imagination that you have to agree with it. I just don't understand how you can argue completely in good faith and good conscience that you live in a truly fully realized democracy when you've got candidates who have to ask for permission to run for office from the people they'd be running against. Now that may kind of go under the radar for some because it's more of a ceremonial role, and so maybe that's the reason it wouldn't get as much kind of backlash or outcry. But to me, that's just strange. And I think, so first of all, I would have voted for either Delahanty or Maria Steen. They're the ones who I was championing. And even after they got excluded, and I was still intending on voting, right? I wasn't one of those people that just went straight to spoil the vote. I was going to give Jim Gavin the number one vote. And I wouldn't be happy with any of them, really. But the reason I was going to give Jim Gavin the number one vote is primarily due to his military experience. As someone who's going to be joining the ranks under the office of the next president, and after a decade and a half of Michael D. Higgins's staunch anti-militarist attitude, one that's being copied by Catherine O'Connelly, I really, really wanted the commander-in-chief of the forces to be a previously serving member. And so that's who I actually would have voted for, Jim Gavin. But now that he's gone, number one, now I'm just completely disillusioned. I don't care at all. Secondly, it particularly upset me once he got excluded, because if it had just happened a few weeks prior, if it had been known that Fianna Fáil weren't going to be running a candidate, so many, like, surely you would have been able to find at least two members of the Oireachtas somewhere who would have given that nomination to Maria Steen, because she only missed out by two. So if Fianna Fáil weren't running a candidate, Maria Steen surely would have gotten those extra two nominations from somewhere. So not only did she end up getting blocked from the process, but ultimately she ended up being blocked from the process for no reason, because Fianna Fáil don't even have a candidate now. So it was really just a waste of a process. And I thought I really feel for her there. In terms of reform, like I said, if it were completely up to me, we wouldn't even have a presidency. But if we're going to work in the framework of the real world, this would be my recommendation for the most realistic solution that I think we could meet halfway, and it would kind of suit both groups a little bit if we were going to reform it a little bit. So the way I think we could do it is we could have it so that rather than a presidential nomination or candidacy being secured through either 20 nominations or 4 county council nominations, we could bring in an amendment to amalgamate or kind of aggregate those two avenues. And what I mean by that is it would no longer be an instance where you have to get 20 nominations or 4 county council nominations. It could be an aggregation of the both. So if you are able to get 2 county councils to nominate you, then you only need to get 10 members of the Oireachtas to nominate you. If you can get 1 council, you need 15. If you can get 3 councils, you only need 5 members of the Oireachtas. And I think that would actually be far superior, because you've got presidential candidate aspirationals who are, they kind of almost, like, you don't get a very long campaign runtime compared to other countries, right? So they're essentially having to kind of choose whether to fully commit themselves to the council route, like, say, Gareth Sheridan did, or the nomination route, like Maria Steen did. And then you've got guys like Delahanty who almost kind of couldn't make their mind up one way or the other. And the same with Conor McGregor. They kind of left it too late, and they kind of couldn't choose which way they wanted to go, councils or Oireachtas. And so they ended up kind of getting completely shafted. They couldn't really get any progress because they left it too late to make their mind up. So you're having to get these candidates to take a big gamble. They're having to really assess themselves, and they're having to take a big gamble. Do they fully want to commit to the Oireachtas route or the council route? Because if they split their attention, it's going to make it less likely for them to get either. So if you allowed it to be an aggregation process, I think it would actually be much easier for aspirational candidates to get on the ballot, but it would also still keep the overall core structure that we have now. And so that may be still seen as acceptable to the current establishment, because it does still give some top-down degree of power to the parties in charge. But I still think it would be more democratic. So if you're talking all radicalism aside, if you want to give a more realistically applied solution, that's maybe an amendment we could do and see how that goes, and maybe phase out of that system altogether one day. But that's maybe kind of a halfway point I could see some people being willing to accept.
You know what? Yeah, I think that's a pretty sensible actually way to look at it. I agree that it needs some sort of reform. It's just very difficult for any non-party aligned candidate to get onto the ballot at the moment, unless you have like noble people like Michael Healy who are willing to nominate someone but not actually back them. It's just very hard. From the historian lens, I'm fairly sure the reason in the first place why De Valera wrote this into the Constitution was because he was kind of, the Bunrak Nahéireann, I think, was 1933 or in and around that time anyway. Correct me if I'm wrong. And
1937.
37. Sorry, my God, Maleshka. Excuse me. Yeah, 37. So yeah, prime, like I suppose Nazi Germany, and I think he was kind of looking at what was going on in Germany, and he thought, yeah, we don't want this over here. But at the same time, I don't think De Valera would approve of what went on with Fine Gael and his former party Fianna Fáil. Well, I don't think he'd approve of them literally blocking their councillors from their right to their conscience. I don't think he would agree with that, and the limited options that are now on this current ballot. So it might have been noble what De Valera was kind of trying to do, but it clearly hasn't. It clearly hasn't materialized so well when we have a situation where you essentially have a choice for people of a mind like ourselves who do not subscribe to the left-wing ideology that Catherine Connolly espouses, but are also quite anti-government. You're left really stuck between a rock and a hard place. So I definitely think there needs to be some sort of an amendment, and maybe maybe your kind of realism element is one to look at in terms of just a mix of council and a Oireachtas route. I think it's a very interesting way to look at it. Just
another just real quick, another element of political structure that I think is really worth visiting is if you've heard of it, it's kind of direct democracy or Swiss style democracy,
right? Yeah,
and it's actually it's a provision I believe we used to have to a degree in some matters, and it's something that ironically enough actually Conor McGregor, that was one of the main elements of rhetoric that he was championing a lot during his campaign, is the ability for people of the electorate to directly introduce and call for referendums rather than pure parliamentary decisions. So you could have it so that, say for example, I'll throw a ballpark figure out there. Say if you could get 5 to 10%, maybe 20% on the upper scale if you were more strict because it's a smaller country. If you were to get anywhere from 5 to 20% of the electorate to sign a petition, that could introduce that would compel the government to hold a referendum. And so you could personally, I think that should just be a provision for all laws, period. It's something that I'm a big fan of. We should have direct democracy in this country, but particularly to presidential candidate selection, if you were to introduce a sub law that uses the format of Swiss style democracy, I feel like that could be really beneficial, because that would have given the ability for someone like Conor McGregor or Nick Delahanty to say, right, I want to be a candidate, sign this petition if you think I should be on the ballot. And that could be a third way of doing it outside of the councils and the Oireachtas members. And it's also a great selection process for who could actually become president, because it kind of kills two birds with one stone, because it leaves no doubt in the candidate's mind. Because if you can't even get enough signatures of people to vote for you to be on the ballot, well then you know for a fact that you wouldn't have gotten voted to win as president. So you would then know that it's a good thing you're not contesting, because you'll know then that you wouldn't have won. If you can't even get enough people to actually back you in on the candidate, you sure as hell wouldn't have gotten voted as president. So that would do a great part in kind of dispelling that kind of paranoia that a lot of people have, where it's like, oh, I was sabotaged by the state. And first of all, paranoia, it's only paranoia to a degree if it's true. But people say, oh, I was sabotaged by the state, they're trying to suppress me. That would kind of get rid of a lot of that kind of rhetoric from anti-establishmentarians, because then you could say to them, look, the fact, like, if you weren't able to get people to even want you on the ballot, then you wouldn't have gotten elected,
It's actually a really interesting point, yeah, because one thing that pisses me off a lot, to be honest with you, is when I see, and I'm not blaming candidates for doing this, they have to do it, they have to fund their campaign somewhere, but when it's like, oh, donate this for my campaign, and it's like oftentimes for candidates that are never going to be successful even, and it's just it just feels like it's taking money away from like potentially vulnerable people. So like, yeah, if a candidate could do that, where they know that they don't have a chance of actually getting like elected, it saves the hassle, and it saves a lot of potential of people spending money that they don't have or whatever. So yeah, I think that's anybody who is for democracy, I don't see why they'd be against direct Swiss democracy, to be honest. Yeah, I know it's a fantastic shout. Just sticking on the topic of the presidential election, there's a big campaign at the moment to spoil your vote. There's, I believe they had their press conference today. The likes of Declan Ganley, Michael McCarthy,
Elaine
Mullally, thank you, and
Delahanty was there as well.
Paul Trevor as well, the chef. So yeah, what's your thoughts on would you say it's a legitimate form of protest to spoil your vote, or is it just a waste of time? What do you kind of make of it all?
Yeah, so I do think it is completely legitimate. And here's the way I would see it. To me, what is a vote, right? So that's the question. What is a vote? To me, a vote, my definition would be a clear written display of your sentiment and intention in a political context. To me, that's what a vote is, right? I feel like that's a pretty good definition. So spoiling your vote does that, because you're getting across the sentiment and the preference that you don't want any of these people. You want this other candidate, or you want to change the system as a whole, whatever. Now, sure, it may not have direct, tangible results, but it is a clear written indication displaying your intention, preference, and sentiment, right? So I would actually say that spoiling your vote is a vote. It's no different from voting for a candidate who ends up losing, in the sense that obviously it doesn't have a direct effect, but it makes a percentage of the electorate's position known, which is something that any competent government, either executive or parliamentary, would and should and ought to take into account. And so I really repudiate the kind of sentiment that I've seen from people saying like, oh, voting is a privilege, so you should, right? To a certain extent, I would agree with that. But where I would disagree with them on is I would say that spoiling your vote is actually a vote. And I personally encourage it. I know to go back to the National Party, just because they've been the most kind of officially organised with that whole movement. Like, I don't know if you've been tuned into that, but members of the National Party have come up with this great slogan. I believe it's an original to them anyway. I first heard Patrick Quinlan talk about it, the kick them up the arse, which is absolutely an amazing slogan. And the past few days now, I've seen some of the boys going around doing leafleting, putting that in people's boxes. They've been the biggest official driver of that movement. And I do approve of it. I would encourage people who aren't happy to spoil their vote. I'm not very far away from the place I'd be voting at. So, and a couple of my other family members will be voting anyway. So I'll probably go with them. And I most likely will spoil the ballot. If I don't have anything else going on that day, I do intend to show up, and I do intend to spoil my ballot myself. I think that people can be pretty defeatist with it, in the sense that, sure, what's the point on doing it if it's not going to have any direct change? People are looking at it the wrong way who say that. Direct change comes from amalgamation of indirect change. That's the way I see it. So to me, the best way you can resist the current political predicament and make your presence known and wanting to change it is a combination of three things. So first of all, we need electoral communication, right? Showing that we're not happy with the way things are. That's done via petitions and via things like spoiling your ballot. And you can maybe even carry it on to the next local and general elections to a degree if things get worse. Who knows? That's the first one. The second one is more mass demonstrations. So they need to be more coordinated and need to be more often happening. And then the third is civil disobedience, right? Impactful but lawful action. Civil disobedience. So, and I'll give a quick shout out to a woman named Sylvia Harrison and imin.ie. Look into that woman and look into that website, imin.ie. She's doing a movement at the moment that's called imin, and it's a civil disobedience movement, and it's encouraging people to try and use cash when they can, try and boycott places that are only doing digital payments, try and boycott places that only have self-service automated checkouts, avoid drawing new debt if you can, and be cognizant when you're doing so. make companies or organizations, whether state or private, struggle a bit to get bills and payments from you, be awkward about it, and know your rights within the civil courts when doing so. I think it's a combination of those three things that will lead to ultimate progress. I would not agree with the sentiment of some other more radicals in our community that say, oh, the talk is over, we need to be going out and fighting, we're not voting our way out with this. I think that's a bit dramatic. So I wouldn't be quite on board that ship yet. We'll see where we are in a few years' time, but I wouldn't subscribe to that at the moment. I still believe in diplomatic and democratic values in terms of restoration of our predicaments. I think the Irish people historically have been in much less favorable positions, with much less ability at their disposal and resource at their disposal to escape from it. I would encourage to spoil the ballot movement if you're not happy with either of the candidates.
Very good, Mahu. We'll put that website imin.ie in the description down below for anyone that's interested in looking at that. I'm actually quite interested by it myself, so I'll definitely have a look at it. It sounds fascinating for sure. So we'll leave it.
imin.ie.
imin. My apologies. Yeah, we will get that in the description down below for people to check out. Fair play to Sylvia. You said is running that.
Sylvia Harrison.
Shout out to her. We'll definitely get that linked in the description. Jake, last question here. It's a bit of a deep one. You can answer it whatever way you want as we kind of close out here. It's been a great discussion. What would be Jake Fitzsimons' ideal Ireland?
Yeah, so this is something that I do definitely have an answer for. It's something that I've thought about a lot. Obviously, being someone who's running for local elections first, I tend to go on a bit less so about ideological politics because, it's kind of pretentious as a councillor whose job it is to fill in potholes and process application grants. And nobody really cares about your philosophical view on free will or whether you're a utilitarian or a deontologist, So I kind of don't like to be too pretentious like that. But no, I'm a very ideological person. Anyone who knows me will tell you that. And even going through my profile, I'm a huge ideologue and I'm very radical in terms of the changes that I want and in terms of the structure that I want to live in. So the ideal Ireland for me is one that is based off of a mixture of self-actualization and national pride and national effort. I feel like a lot of people, especially my own age these days, they're very individualistic. And I feel like a lot of it actually has been perpetuated by the modern digital age that we're in. So many people, they're very isolationist, they're individualistic. People don't have the same sense of community. I feel like nationalism is a bit under decline. And so my ideal Ireland is essentially one that is very much based on nationalism. It's about national pride. It's one where everyone in the country not only contributes to, but wants to and is proud to contribute to. It's an Ireland where everyone is proud to be Irish, where everyone is loyal to the Irish nation, where everyone loves the Irish nation, and where everyone in their day-to-day life proudly and happily serves the Irish nation. If you want to get into a political or socio-economic description of how that's achieved, I have some ideas. So first of all, as I mentioned, I would like to see an abolition of the presidency. To be clear, just in general, I want a much smaller government. I want a smaller, more centralized government with more, not an authoritarian government, but more authoritarian principles in some ways. So I want a smaller, more centralized government. I think we should abolish the presidency. I think we should abolish chairde. Of course, United Ireland is one, obviously. That's one of the core things that needs to be addressed. To me, an ideal Ireland, first and foremost, above everything else, is one that inhabits the entire island, including the Northern Territories. And so I want to do that, abolish presidency, abolish chairde. I think we need to reduce the amount of TDs that we have. And I think that we need to, in general, have a look at the way we vote when it comes to general elections. Local elections, I understand having constituencies, but I've floated the idea before of abolishing constituencies for general elections and having it so that it's just core, kind of have it the way the the US states do for the Senate, where it would just be Cork voting for 3 or 4 Cork TDs, whoever. Dublin votes for the Dublin TDs, Carlow for the Carlow TDs, whatever. It's what else would I say? I think that the ideal island of Ireland, and we spoke about this earlier, should have a degree of national service. I think every person after secondary school at some point should serve a few months to a year in the military. I think we should have increased military expenditure and increased dignity and opportunity and compensation for all of our serving troops. I think that we need to move towards a more US-style, executive-based kind of illiberal democracy with direct Swiss-style representation rather than the typical European parliamentary format that we have at the moment. I think more power needs to be given to the executive. What else would I say? I'm a fan of corporatism or a degree of Keynesian economics. I think that almost, that I can think of anyway, I think every single sector in a country ideally should have a state option and private options. In some sectors, I would be a bigger proponent of availing of the state services, such as, for gas, electricity, perhaps transport, construction, and then there are other ones such as entertainment, news, education would be a mix of the two as well. So different sectors I'd put more emphasis on private sourcing for, and other sectors I'd say public. But I think all sectors to a degree should have one state option and private options, and they kind of compete with each other. The state should redirect a lot of its subsidization, and this is especially relevant in the housing sector, redirect a lot of your subsidization for the private sector in the housing area and actually put it towards a state-run construction company. And that is actually something that I agree with the radical left on. It's probably the only thing I would say I agree with People Before Profit on, is that I do think we should have a state-run organization for pretty much every sector. And I would like to see a move away towards reliance on privatization. And I would also introduce some elements of increased regulation for some select parts of the economy. So I think we need to copy Spain. I think we need to bring in an introduction. We need to put a complete freeze on the purchasing by foreign conglomerates and foreign entities on housing developments and the like. But in general, I would actually say we need less regulation. So I would like to see less regulation and less bureaucracy and less red tape in the public sector, and to a degree in the private sector as well. Because I think that at the moment, a lot of the big bodies representing certain sectors, such as agriculture, they're actually beholden to regulation. You have like the Irish Farmers Association, which to me, it does not represent ordinary everyday farmers anymore. They're essentially a puppet for the highest bidding conglomerates. And so I think we need to do away with a lot of that. Just to summarize, when that question gets asked, there's so much stuff that I want to say, so my brain kind of, the neurons kind of go firing. But just to summarize, I think my ideal Ireland is one that's fully united, the entire island, one that's heavily based off of nationalism, smaller, more centralized government with national service, more executive power, more corporatist or Keynesian elements, and more emphasis on national sovereignty and national efficiency rather than globalist appeasement.
Almar fada cara Mushtanukul is fairlum Ninyar the Curl Lakela. So but all I said there was well done, my friend, as you probably understood. And then my kind of Irish proverb / old saying, my favorite one is there's no strength without togetherness. And I think that kind of encapsulates your views on community, isolationism, versus individualism that we're seeing in the digital modern age. So yeah, I think that's a really good answer to the question, what is your ideal Ireland? I think it's something we should all ponder to ourselves, and kind of that's when we debate and the competition of ideas goes against each other, and we create the best version of life for ourselves, which I think that's what we're all striving for at the end of the day, without getting too deep into it. Jake, it's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you. I really think you've spoken very well. I think you've given a great account of yourself. I would say courage and intellect well beyond your years. Is there anything you'd like to say to the viewers as we crash out?
I would just like to say, anyone who watched this full thing, you're an absolute trooper. Gurmila Mahago. John, you're an absolute gent. The time I've been acquainted with you, I've only good things to say, and it was an absolute pleasure to spend some time with you this evening. I really appreciated your time, and it seems quite strongly that you appreciated mine, which I'm very glad. And thank you so much for the opportunity. I'd love to do this again sometime. Thank you to everyone who watches and gave your time and attention. Give me a follow if you haven't already. I'm Jake Fitzsimons _ on X and Jake _ Fitzsimons on TikTok. And just keep an eye on me. Big things are coming.
Good man yourself, Jake. Look, we'll end off there, folks. Thank you all so much for watching. Any guest suggestions, any criticism, leave it in the comments below. That's what it's there for. Thanks all so much for watching. We'll talk to you soon. Slán go forward.